My housemaster, Kenneth Chow, who hated me, felt there was about to be a revolution in the school, started by me, caused by my guitar, so I was banned from playing guitar most of the time at school.
Mike Rutherford's father was a decorated war hero. A captain in the Royal Navy, awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, he was a man of immense discipline and tradition. After retiring from the Navy when Mike was 8 years old, he took a management job in industry, but the naval precision never left him. The Rutherford home was ordered, polite, and emotionally reserved. It wasn't a cold household, but feelings were things to be managed, not openly expressed. A Bechstein grand piano, played beautifully by Mike's mother, sat in the house, but his father's relationship with music was one of respectful distance. He simply couldn't comprehend the passion and obsession that was beginning to brew inside his son. Rutherford was not a natural academic. He was sent to Charterhouse, one of the country's great public schools, a place steeped in history and designed to produce leaders of empire and pillars of the establishment. For a boy like Mike, it was purgatory, a world of cold showers and arcane rules where he was perpetually trying to fit a mold that was not his shape. While others excelled on the rugby pitch, Rutherford was discovering a different world, crackling through the tiny speaker of a transistor radio hidden under his pillow. The Beatles, the Kinks, the Rolling Stones, they were singing a language that made perfect sense to him in a way that Latin declensions never would.
I think you've got to go back to remember that time, sort of must have been about early 60s. The Beatles came out. It was a really exciting time. And I think, there'd been a huge change in England. I've got a big thing about this, a huge social change. And I just caught that brunt of it, of that kind of old generation, empire days, 2 world wars drifting away, and we come along, the young guns, having missed the war, and then the Beatles came out, and the Stones, and the Who, and the Kinks. Exciting time.
His first guitar was a cheap nylon string affair, bought with pocket money. It was his escape. For his 13th birthday, his parents bought him a solid-body electric guitar from Burns, a copy of a Stratocaster. It was a thing of beauty. But an electric guitar needs an amplifier, and this presented a problem in a house run on naval time and in a boarding school where noise was frowned upon. Rutherford vividly remembers his father's reaction to the clumsy, amplified twangs coming from his room, a look not of anger, but of profound bewilderment. His father once said, in a moment of exasperation, "Mike, you have all the gear, but you have no idea how to play it." He wasn't wrong, but he missed the point. It wasn't about being good, not yet. It was about making a noise, about finding a voice. At Charterhouse, he wasn't alone in this musical rebellion. He found others who shared the same secret language.
Genesis were all schoolboys together at Charterhouse Public School. When they started out, the band got a lot of stick for being posh pop stars, but in the swinging 60s, Charterhouse was a bastion of Victorian morality and imperial values.
There was Tony Banks, a gifted pianist, shy, serious, and intellectually formidable, who was as enthralled by pop music as he was by the classics. And then there was Anthony "Ant" Phillips. Ant was a phenomenal guitarist, technically light years ahead of Rutherford, with a natural flair and a deep understanding of melody. They were all misfits, seeking refuge from the stifling conformity of the school. Music was their sanctuary. Mike and Ant formed a band called Anon. Tony was in a rival group, the Garden Wall. But the rivalry was friendly, born of a shared passion.
Basically, many years ago, there was sort of 2 bands started. Anthony Phillips and I, and Richard MacPhail started a band called the Anon with Rivers Job, and the other kind of rival group was Pete and Tony.
The school provided almost no encouragement for this kind of music. It was seen as frivolous, a distraction. But creativity finds a way. They would book dusty, forgotten music rooms and make a racket. By now, Rutherford had switched to bass, partly because Ant was the superior lead guitarist, and partly out of a fascination with players like Paul McCartney, who used the bass as a melodic counterpoint. He saved up and bought a Hofner bass, just like McCartney's.
The other guitarist, Ant Phillips, was a better guitarist, so it was like, well, I'll do the bass then, and rhythm too.
It was in these furtive sessions that the seeds of something much bigger were sown. They were learning their craft, not through formal lessons, but through imitation, experimentation, and a shared desire to create something that was theirs. The austere and creatively restrictive environment of Charterhouse, which actively discouraged the frivolous pursuit of pop music, had an unintended effect. It pushed a small group of musically obsessed boys together, forcing them to create their own world, their own rules, and their own sound in secret. The effect of their shared isolation was that their little musical world became incredibly intense. For the boys, the band wasn't just a band, it was a lifeline.
I was banned from playing the guitar most of my career at Charterhouse, because it was a symbol of the revolution.
We were kind of up against it a bit. It was a bit like if anybody did badly in form order, they were pulled out of guitar for 2 weeks. So the backs were against the wall.
After leaving Charterhouse, the question of what next loomed large. The only thing that mattered was the music. They decided to merge their two groups, Anon and the Garden Wall, creating a new entity with Rutherford, Tony Banks, Ant Phillips, and Chris Stewart on drums. But they needed a singer. Another former Charterhouse boy, the flamboyant and theatrical Peter Gabriel, had been observing their rehearsals.
Peter Gabriel would sneak off and hang out in London clubs, and inevitably school groups formed.
He wasn't a technical musician, but he had a unique voice, an innate stage presence, and a powerful imagination. With his addition, the chemistry felt complete. They made a crude demo tape of short Bee Gees-esque pop numbers.
We'd get together for different sessions, and I think, whenever you start playing music as a teenager, you still stand in front of the mirror and imagine a huge audience or whatever, all the fantasies are there.
Clueless about the music industry, they took a shot in the dark and sent the tape to Jonathan King. King was a Charterhouse old boy himself and a bona fide pop star with a hit under his belt.
After Baden-Powell, the most famous Charterhouse old boy was pop picker Jonathan King. His chart success annoyed the teachers, but inspired the boys.
He was their only link to the world they so desperately wanted to join. Against all odds, King listened to the tape, and he liked what he heard.
And none of us had the courage to do it. So we had this friend called John Alexander, who was kind of a bit more he had a bit more spirit than perhaps the rest of us, and he just rushed up to him and charged and put it in his hand and said, "Listen to this."
He invited them to London, into a proper recording studio, and offered them a record deal. It was surreal. King became their mentor and producer, and it was he who christened them Genesis.
Driving back home, I listened to it and I thought it was really good. There were some interesting songs and I loved the guy's voice, the lead vocalist's voice. So I called them up and said, "What's the name of the band?" And they said, "Well, we don't have one."
The band hated the name, finding it pretentious and grandiose. But he was Jonathan King, and they were nobody. So Genesis it was.
So he just suggested Genesis because it's nice and simple. He thought, oh, sounds all right. So we put it out under the name Genesis, and it kind of, it stuck.
King told them, "I see you as a writers' collective, like a sort of religious Bee Gees." Under King's guidance, they secured a deal with Decca Records and recorded their first album, From Genesis to Revelation. King's vision was for short, simple pop songs drenched in strings and horns. The band, young and impressionable, went along with it, thrilled just to be in a studio. The problem was, this wasn't really who they were becoming. Their tastes were already shifting towards the more complex sounds of bands like King Crimson and Procol Harum. But King wanted hits.
The album I made, which is called From Genesis to Revelation, is still, I think, one of the great undiscovered albums of the 60s, because it's got some super songs on it that will be hits today.
The recording process was a steep learning curve. Rutherford recalled the engineer telling him his bass was out of tune. He didn't even know how to tune it properly. The final album was a strange hybrid, their songs filtered through Jonathan King's pop sensibilities. When it was released, it was a commercial disaster. To make matters worse, record shops, confused by the name Genesis and the album's title, filed it in the religious section.
Unfortunately, the album wound up selling just 650 copies. It didn't help that Genesis to Revelation was all too often filed in the religious section of record shops. In retrospect, a slow build-up to stardom was no bad thing, but at the time it was a disappointment that led to some soul-searching and eventually to Genesis and Jonathan King going their separate ways.
The dream had turned sour. Decca dropped them, and Jonathan King lost interest. They were back to square one, now tainted by failure. The album's complete commercial failure coupled with the feeling that it had been artistically compromised and misunderstood from the start, had a profound cause. It forced the band to sever ties with their pop-oriented mentor and retreat from London, compelling them to fundamentally rethink their entire musical direction and commit to the more complex, less commercial sound they truly wanted to pursue. The effect of that failure was liberating. With nothing left to lose, they were free from the pressure of writing hit singles and could now follow their own weird and winding path. The band retreated to a tiny, freezing cold cottage in the countryside, owned by the parents of their friend and future road manager, Richard MacPhail.
They spent the autumn of 1969 playing their first gigs at youth clubs and colleges, and then retreated to get it together in the country, writing their bolder second album, Trespass, in a cottage in Dorking.
It was here, at Christmas Cottage, that the real genesis was forged. They lived and breathed music, 24 hours a day. Life in the cottage was intensely communal and incredibly disciplined. They would wake up, have breakfast, and write all day, breaking only for meals. With no television or distractions, it was just them and the music. In this creative crucible, their signature sound began to emerge. They would sit in a circle, blending folk melodies with rock energy and classical structures. The songs became longer, more episodic, telling complex stories. Tony Banks would conjure beautiful, intricate keyboard passages. Ant Phillips would weave delicate guitar lines around them. Rutherford was developing a new style, using a 12-string acoustic for rhythm and texture while simultaneously playing bass pedals with his feet. Peter Gabriel's lyrics were becoming more ambitious, filled with strange characters and surreal imagery. A new, more powerful drummer, John Mayhew, had joined, enabling them to explore more dynamic ideas.
Drummer John Silver left and was replaced by John Mayhew, their first recruit from the ads at the back of Melody Maker.
In his autobiography, The Living Years, Rutherford wrote, "It was a cramped, intense, wonderful time. We didn't just work together, we lived inside each other's pockets. That's a powerful bond, and the music we made was a direct result of it." The material written in that cottage became the backbone of their next album, Trespass. It was a huge leap forward, featuring long, aggressive theatrical songs like The Knife, the polar opposite of their debut. They signed with a new progressive label, Charisma Records, whose owner, Tony Stratton Smith, gave them the freedom to be themselves.
With a new professionalism and a proper record deal with manager Tony Stratton Smith's Charisma label, it seemed like Genesis were well set up, but the music they made was constantly exploring and asking questions, and so were the guys in the band.
They began gigging relentlessly, honing their craft on the university circuit. The live shows were becoming an event, with Gabriel beginning to experiment with his stage persona. But the intensity of it all was taking a heavy toll on Ant Phillips. A sensitive soul and a perfectionist, he suffered from crippling stage fright. The pressure of performing his intricate guitar parts live, night after night, became unbearable. The rest of the band, young and fiercely focused on moving forward, were perhaps not as sympathetic as they should have been. After falling ill with glandular fever, the joy of creating music was completely eroded by the terror of performing it.
The heavy touring schedule began to freak out Genesis founding member, guitarist Anthony Phillips. Now, he'd had enough.
After a gig in London, Ant told the others he was leaving. The news was a bombshell. He was a founder member, a key writer, an incredible musician. It was hard to imagine Genesis without him. The effect of Ant Phillips's departure was catastrophic. It felt like the end. Not only had they lost their lead guitarist, but drummer John Mayhew also left around the same time, reducing the band to a trio of Rutherford, Banks and Gabriel. For a while they genuinely considered packing it all in, but a shared stubbornness kicked in. Having come so far, they refused to give up. They decided to persevere, knowing they needed to find musicians who could take them to another level. They placed an anonymous advert in the back of Melody Maker magazine. Band seeks sensitive guitarist for acoustic and electric 12-string.
I was the one who really made the suggestion that I think we had to get a better drummer, because if we're going to start again, we needed to get more strength in that area, particularly if we're going to have Ant, who was a very strong contributor to the writing of the group and everything. So that's when we auditioned really for both a drummer and a guitarist at the same time.
Before they found their guitarist, they found their drummer. At auditions held at Peter Gabriel's parents' house, a cheerful, confident lad from London named Phil Collins sat behind the kit. The moment he started playing, the entire room seemed to lift. His energy was incredible. He wasn't just keeping time, he was driving the music, adding fills and accents they hadn't even thought of. After his turn, he politely went for a swim in the Gabriel family pool while the next drummer played. There was no comparison.
So I took a swim in the pool, which was kind of, wow, people live like this. And listened to all the other drummers, the 3 or 4 drummers ahead of me.
Peter famously called him up and said, "You've got the job if you want it." Collins's arrival was a shot of adrenaline. He was a brilliant musician who brought a sense of humour and working-class pragmatism that was a perfect antidote to the band's serious middle-class angst.
You can sometimes tell a good musician from the way they sit down at their instrument before they played a note. And that was definitely the case with Phil. He had a confidence about him.
Finding a guitarist proved harder. One of the respondents to the advert was Steve Hackett. Quiet and unassuming, his playing was extraordinary. He had a revolutionary technique, using tapping and sweep picking long before they became commonplace. His style was the perfect foil for Tony Banks's keyboards, capable of being both lyrical and ferociously avant-garde.
I was thrilled to be working with with the guys and with newly acquired equipment.
With Collins and Hackett on board, the classic Genesis lineup was born.
The new 5-piece began writing together for Nursery Crime and going on the road.
The change was immediate and profound. They now had a rhythm section of immense power and subtlety, and a lead guitarist who could take them into uncharted territory. This new lineup recorded the album Nursery Crime, another quantum leap forward in musicianship. Songs like The Musical Box and The Return of the Giant Hogweed were the epitome of their progressive rock ambitions. Rutherford's role evolved further, frequently playing a double-necked guitar to handle both bass and 12-string rhythm parts, often using bass pedals to hold down the low end. They became a formidable live act, fronted by an increasingly theatrical Peter Gabriel. He began telling bizarre, rambling stories between songs to cover for tuning breaks, and the stories became a beloved part of the show. Then came the costumes. One night in Dublin, he disappeared during an instrumental section and re-emerged wearing his wife's red dress and a fox's head. The band had no idea it was coming. The audience went wild. The press loved it. Suddenly, Genesis was on the cover of the music papers.
Genesis had started to stir up an almost messianic fervour that pushed Peter to new performance heights. He began to develop his very individual stage persona. His visual creativity exploded over the band's next 2 albums, Nursery Crime and Foxtrot. Peter amazed the audience, and his fellow band members too, by bounding on stage in the red dress and fox's head illustrated on the album cover.
This new visual element propelled them to another level of fame, leading to the album Foxtrot and its 23-minute centerpiece, Supper's Ready. This multi-part musical suite became the core of their live show and cemented their reputation as leaders of the progressive rock movement. The band's growing reputation, built on a foundation of powerful new musicianship and a unique sound, was now being amplified by an increasingly flamboyant theatricality. This visual spectacle, largely driven by Peter Gabriel's extraordinary costumes and stage presence, began to attract enormous media attention, causing a subtle but significant shift in focus that would create both opportunities and internal tensions. The effect of their burgeoning fame was a double-edged sword. They were finally achieving the recognition they craved, headlining bigger venues and selling more records with the successful album Selling England by the Pound. Yet the public and media focus was becoming increasingly skewed. The band was becoming known as Peter Gabriel's Genesis, and the other members were seen as his backing band. It wasn't Gabriel's fault. He was simply a compelling and creative frontman, but it created an undeniable imbalance. For their next project, they felt a need to reassert the band's collective identity with a double album based on a single concept. This led to The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. Gabriel, inspired by a strange dream, conceived the story of Rael, a Puerto Rican street kid in New York City.
You gotta get in to get out.
Press had grown wary of concept albums. The Lamb caught the backlash even from within the band itself.
The creation of The Lamb was a fraught and difficult process. For the first time, the writing duties were split. Gabriel went away to write the entire story and lyrics himself, while Rutherford, Banks, Collins and Hackett were left to compose the music separately. This was a fundamental and damaging change to their working method. Rutherford later recalled, "It was a mistake. Our strength was always the 4 or 5 of us in a room, interacting. On The Lamb, the music was written, and then Peter had to try and fit his story around it. It felt disconnected. The atmosphere was tense. Gabriel felt increasingly isolated, his focus further pulled away by interest from film director William Friedkin.
He was realising that Genesis could not continue to function as the only vehicle for his ideas.
I had been contacted by William Friedkin, who'd just done The Exorcist, which was a hot film at that time, and really well-made film. And he had great ideas for sort of revolutionising Hollywood and bringing in whole new teams of people who'd never worked in film before. And he wanted me in to work on ideas, story ideas and visual ideas.
During the recording, Gabriel's first child was born with severe health complications, requiring him to be with his family.
It's the time of the birth of my first child, and there was a really rough birth, and the hospital didn't think she was going to make it, and she spent first month in an incubator. Now, to me, there was no question of priorities,
This caused further delays and exacerbated the tensions, with the rest of the band, perhaps insensitively, feeling he was letting them down. Despite the difficulties, they created a monumental piece of work, a dense, powerful, and utterly unique album. But it broke them. By the time it was finished, Peter Gabriel had privately decided to leave the band. He agreed to see through the colossal tour, performing the entire double album from start to finish every night.
They then persuaded me to stay on, finish doing a tour, which would take us till middle of 75. And I guess it was somewhere around summer, autumn 74 when I decided to quit.
The Lamb tour was a hugely stressful production, plagued by technical problems. By the time it was over, Gabriel officially announced his departure at a band meeting in Cleveland. There was no single dramatic argument. It was a slow, sad drifting apart. He felt he was in a creative cage and needed to be free. Peter Gabriel's departure after the grueling tour for The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway left the band without its iconic frontman, its primary lyricist, and its public face. This created a huge vacuum and led the music press and the public to widely, and logically, assume that the band was finished.
Funny thing about change, when Ant left and then when Peter left, you never look for change, but when it happens, it forces us to change. And something new happens, which is not, looking on the bright side of things, that's a good thing. When you're forced to sort of reappraise and to not get stuck in a sort of certain groove.
The effect of the media writing them off was, paradoxically, to galvanize the remaining members. They were angry. They had spent years building the band and refused to let it die. Determined to prove the narrative wrong, that Gabriel was Genesis and they were just his sidemen, Rutherford, Banks, Collins and Hackett decided to carry on. They knew it was a massive gamble, with the most obvious problem being how to replace a singer as iconic as Peter Gabriel. Their first step was to write new material. They needed to prove to themselves, more than anyone, that the creative well hadn't run dry. The music poured out of them, feeling fresh, melodic, and powerful.
Next time we definitely thought, would it work? So we did what we always do, is we said let's go in and try a bit of writing. See what happens.
With Rutherford and Banks as the main writers, the songs that would become A Trick of the Tail took shape.
If we can help you, we will.
The music was complex and progressive, yet it possessed a newfound warmth and accessibility. They were immensely proud of what they had created, but the song still needed a voice. The great singer hunt began. An anonymous ad in Melody Maker brought in hundreds of demo tapes, most of them from singers trying to imitate Peter Gabriel, the one thing the band didn't want. They auditioned about 30 hopefuls in person. It was a soul-destroying disaster. Desperation began to set in. They had a fantastic album written, with no one to sing it. Throughout this process, Phil Collins had been patiently teaching the songs to the auditioning singers. One day, out of sheer frustration, the others suggested that Phil himself should have a go. He was very reluctant. He was the drummer, not a lead singer. Taking over from Peter Gabriel seemed an impossible task. He said, "I was happy behind the drums." Being the frontman seemed like a lot of hard work. But they persuaded him to try one of the new songs, a ballad called Squonk. He went into the studio, sang it once, and the others were stunned. The voice was perfect, powerful, emotional, and clear. The solution had been right there behind the drum kit the whole time. Collins agreed to sing on the album, but was still unconvinced about doing it live. But once Trick of the Tail was released, the decision was made for them. The album was a huge success, both critically and commercially, outselling all their previous albums with Gabriel. It was the ultimate vindication. The public had accepted the new Genesis. The band was not only alive, but it was bigger than ever. The incredible and somewhat surprising commercial and critical success of Trick of the Tail and its follow-up, Wind and Wuthering, had a profound effect. It proved beyond all doubt that Genesis could not only survive, but thrive without Peter Gabriel, and in doing so, it irrevocably solidified Phil Collins' position as the band's new and permanent frontman. The effect of their renewed success was a period of intense activity. For live shows, they hired the brilliant Bill Bruford to play drums, allowing Collins to step out to the front of the stage. They became a formidable live act, captured on the album Seconds Out. But behind the scenes, another fault line was appearing. Steve Hackett, a wonderfully creative musician, was feeling increasingly stifled within the band. After releasing a successful solo album, Hackett had a wealth of his own ideas that he felt were being overlooked in the increasingly Banks and Rutherford-dominated writing sessions. He wanted the freedom to follow his own path. During the mixing of Seconds Out, he announced he was leaving. He later told a journalist, "The band was becoming very successful, but it was also becoming more of a machine. I needed to get off the train." His departure was amicable, but it left the band in a strange position. They were now a trio: Rutherford, Banks, and Collins. After a brief moment of doubt, their famous stubbornness kicked in again. They decided to go into the studio, just the three of them, and see what happened. They made a conscious decision not to audition for a new guitarist. Rutherford would take over all the guitar parts on the records. It was a daunting prospect. Steve Hackett was a virtuoso. Rutherford saw himself as more of a rhythm player in the vein of Pete Townsend, focused on power and texture rather than flashy solos. Now he had to do it all. This change had a huge impact on their sound. Without Hackett's intricate guitar work, there was more sonic space. The songs naturally became more direct and streamlined. Their next album was fittingly titled And Then There Were Three. It was a pivotal record, a bridge between their progressive past and their pop future.
So, why is the album called Then There Were Three? And you think, oh god, it's going to be a long haul. Just seemed obvious, really. We were three, so that was it.
The songs were shorter and more concise, but the album still had its prog rock moments. Crucially, it also had something they'd never had before, a genuine international hit single. The song was Follow You, Follow Me, with music written by Rutherford.
Along with you, I will follow you, follow
It was a simple, beautiful love song that wasn't intended as a single. But their American record label, Atlantic, was convinced it could be a hit. They were right. The song charted high across the world. Suddenly, Genesis were on top of the pops, and their music was being played in supermarkets. They had a whole new audience, many of whom had never even heard of Supper's Ready.
It's Genesis!
The unexpected and massive global success of Follow You, Follow Me had a transformative cause. It fundamentally altered the band's commercial standing and demographic, breaking them out of the progressive rock niche and setting them on an entirely new trajectory towards mainstream superstardom and the pop charts of the 1980s. The effect of their newfound pop stardom was a seismic shift. The tours got bigger, the money got better, and the pressure mounted. The albums Duke, Abacab, and Genesis saw them successfully blend their progressive instincts with a more direct, accessible sound, experimenting with new technology and dominating the charts. But this success brought its own challenges. Phil Collins's solo career exploded, making him one of the biggest stars on the planet. Genesis had to operate around his schedule. The band would work together for a year, then take a break for a few years for everyone to pursue solo projects. This arrangement, Rutherford believed, was key to their longevity, as it provided a vital creative outlet outside the band. During one of these breaks, after the 1983 Genesis album, Rutherford decided to try a different approach for his own work. His previous solo albums had not found a wide audience, and he knew his strength was in collaboration, not as a frontman. He devised a new concept, a songwriting partnership treated like a band, bringing in different singers to suit each song. A group of mechanics, assembling the parts. The name stuck, Mike and the Mechanics. Teaming up with songwriter B.A. Robertson, Rutherford felt liberated, free from the weight of the Genesis legacy. He needed two distinct voices for the project. A friend recommended Paul Carrack, whose blue-eyed soul voice had defined the hit How Long by the band Ace. For the more rock-oriented tracks, he found Paul Young, the passionate former singer of Sad Cafe. The combination was magic. Their first album was a success, spawning the hits Silent Running and All I Need Is a Miracle. For the second Mechanics album, Rutherford was processing the recent death of his father. Their relationship had been loving but emotionally distant, and he was filled with regret for all the things left unsaid. He channeled these feelings into a song he was writing with B.A. Robertson. The deeply personal lyrics came pouring out. I wasn't there that morning. When my father passed away, I didn't get to tell him all the things I had to say. The song was titled The Living Years. Paul Carrack, who had lost his own father at a young age, connected profoundly with the lyric and delivered a breathtaking vocal performance.
We both lost our fathers about the same time, and we both had new babies about the same time. So the story of communication and losing your father and never seeing their new grandchild was common to both of us. And for both of us, quite emotional to do. You know, a couple of times, I had to leave the room a couple of times, really, because those beautiful words sort of just seem to encapsulate really what those emotions are about. And the other thing I should mention actually is that, not so well known, is that of course Paul Carrack lost his father when he was quite young, very young in fact. So in a sense, I think when Paul sang it, and he sang it so beautifully, I think his emotions about his father and himself kind of came out in the vocal performance, which kind of made the song even better for it.
The raw, universal emotion of that song combined with Paul Carrack's soulful delivery, had a remarkable effect. The Living Years became a global phenomenon, a #1 hit in the United States and around the world. It gave Mike and the Mechanics a massive identity of its own and provided Rutherford with a level of personal and artistic validation completely separate from the Genesis mothership.
Some bands are based on being mates, and that's what they're all about. Genesis has always been based on a musical situation that works. That's where it starts, and I think once that works, you find a way to get on as people.
The effect of their individual successes in the mid-1980s was that when Genesis reconvened in 1985, they were more confident and relaxed than ever. They had nothing left to prove. They came together not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Booking out their studio, The Farm, they simply started jamming. The process was incredibly collaborative and fun. A simple guitar riff from Rutherford, with Collins ad-libbing the phrase "invisible touch" over the top, became an instant pop classic that practically wrote itself. The result of these sessions was the album Invisible Touch. It was the slickest, most commercial, and most successful album of their career. Perfectly attuned to the sound of the mid-1980s, it spawned 5 top 5 singles in the US, a feat only matched at the time by Michael and Janet Jackson. The album sold millions of copies, transforming Genesis from a cult prog band into one of the biggest stadium-filling acts in the world. The Invisible Touch tour was on an unimaginable scale, including 4 sold-out nights at London's Wembley Stadium. It was the absolute pinnacle of their commercial success. Many older fans were horrified by this new pop direction, but for the band, it was a natural evolution. As Collins once said, "We didn't just suddenly start writing pop songs, the audience just got bigger, and the radio started playing them." They never fully abandoned their roots. The album still contained long, complex instrumental sections. They followed it 5 years later with the album We Can't Dance, another colossal seller with another even bigger tour. They were a well-oiled machine, a global brand. But the sheer scale of it all was becoming exhausting. After the colossal We Can't Dance album and tour, the feeling of having achieved everything they could possibly achieve as a band, combined with the physical and emotional exhaustion of operating at that level of global fame for so long, directly led Phil Collins to make the decision to leave, once again plunging the future of Genesis into profound doubt. The effect of Phil's departure in 1996 was a familiar sinking feeling. The press once again wrote them off. Genesis without Phil Collins seemed even more unthinkable than Genesis without Peter Gabriel. Rutherford and Banks were faced with a choice: end it there, or take another huge gamble and continue. They both felt there was still life in the band and decided to carry on. This time, the search for a singer was different. They wanted a new voice, a new energy. A demo from a Scottish singer named Ray Wilson stood out. Wilson, frontman of the grunge pop band Stiltskin, had a powerful, raw, emotional rock voice. After a successful audition, he was their man. With Ray on board, they set about writing a new album, consciously moving away from the pop of the previous era towards a darker, more atmospheric sound that suited his voice perfectly. The resulting album, Calling All Stations, was moody and melancholic, a strong record that represented a genuine attempt to reinvent the band. The problem was, the musical landscape of the late 1990s, dominated by Britpop and alternative rock, had changed completely. While the album was a big success in Europe, it was a commercial failure in America, where the public and the record label failed to embrace a Genesis without Phil Collins. A planned US tour was cancelled. The momentum stalled, and it became clear that this version of the band had run its course. They amicably parted ways with Ray, and Genesis entered a long period of hibernation. For years, that was the end of the story. But in 2007, Rutherford, Banks, and Collins reunited for the joyous Turn It On Again tour to celebrate their music. They did it again for the last Domino tour starting in 2021, an emotional and poignant farewell, with an unwell Collins singing his heart out every night from a chair. Looking back, it was an improbable journey, from a cold room at Charterhouse to selling over 150 million records. The band was a living thing that survived by changing, adapting and shedding its skin, held together by stubbornness and a shared love for writing songs. The Calling All Stations chapter, while commercially difficult, ultimately proved to be the final creative roll of the dice. Its muted reception in America and the subsequent hiatus eventually paved the way for the triumphant and emotionally resonant reunion tours with Phil Collins, which served not as a new beginning, but as the perfect celebratory final act, solidifying the enduring legacy of the band. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Mike Rutherford's career, then you won't want to miss Phil Collins naming his 8 favourite drummers. Just click the thumbnail on screen to keep watching.